your job really changes in the first few years. Your job every 6 months is not the same job as 6 months before. What was important 6 months ago is not necessarily what's important right now, but also the structure of the team is different. So there's the way I think about it, especially being a CEO, but I think this applies well to a founder as well, is that you need to fire yourself from your
Hmm.
job very often.
The following is a conversation with Sarah Touzani, co-founder and CEO of Waggle AI, an innovative AI-driven leadership coaching platform with a background as a former COO in several scale-ups. Sarah brings a wealth of experience in scaling businesses and driving organizational success. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Vishesh. Glad to be here.
We met, we were supposed to meet at Slush. I think you
Yes.
reached out and then we couldn't because, yeah, Slush is such a such a crazy
Crazy
event.
space.
Yeah. And I think you reached out with a very unique line, and I was intrigued because you said, "Let's connect." I promise there's going to be no sales pitch. I was like, "Okay, how is she going to pull that off?"
I I I did stick to my promise, right?
Yes,
I didn't tell you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
everything.
You didn't pitch, and I think we ended up doing a kind of a review of what you guys are doing and getting to know the product. Yeah, it was fun. Maybe you wanna tell the audience about what's Waggle and what you guys do for your customers.
Yeah, Waggle, and Waggle is an AI leadership coach. Think about it as having an Apple Watch or a Whoop band, but instead of it being focused on your fitness, it focuses on your leadership skills. So basically, it follows you around from meeting to meeting. After each meeting, it assesses your performance, looks at all of the skills that you need to be building and having as a leader, from delegation to empathy to how you give feedback, and actually give on each one of those and tells you how you can improve them. And the idea is that it's really there. It's like your personal coach that is with you throughout the day, tracks your performance, and shows progress over time. Because in most cases, with traditional management training, which is a huge market, by the
Hmm.
way, you can't really measure the impact of that. And it actually has been shown by a bunch of studies not to really have an impact, because we forget 90% of any warning if it's not sustained. So with Waggle, you have that ongoing, it helps you build better habits and just follows and makes you a bit better every day.
So this can be used without an additional component of a formal management training included.
That's the idea. So you can, like, there we're seeing two cases. Either someone would have training because like they still want to have like a program training that they want to go through, and they want to make sure that that program and that training sticks over time. They want to make sure that they practice it, that they want to know where they're at and build self-awareness around what they're good at and what's okay. People who like actually don't agree with training, don't love it, or don't have the budget for it and want something that is with them throughout the day, instead of a one-off like classic training, I would say. This also is way less time consuming because it just helps you throughout your day. Takes a few minutes a day to review the feedback and act on it. So you don't need to dedicate a full of just doing the training. You can just go about your day and do what you would usually do and get that.
Yeah, you're still early stage. You've been at it for a year,
A
a
year
year
and
and a
a
half.
half, yeah.
From our conversations, I remember, you have obviously a persona that's actually using, but you have a different buyer. What were some of the challenges convincing the buyer that the user actually needs it, and what were the key learnings there?
We always knew that. I mean, there's two paths for us. We can sell B2C or like almost B2C, meaning that a single manager, this is what we've been doing for the last nine
Mhm.
months a single manager who wants to use it, or a founder who wants to use it because they feel the need for that this back, and they want to get better at what they do, can just use it, either use their learning and development budget if they have one at their company, or they pay it from their own money, um, to use it. And this is how we've been acquiring all of our, like most of our users right now. And after and we did this very intentionally at the beginning, because we wanted to make sure that the end user gets the value we intend from the product, for it to be a sticky product. There's, in this space where, I mean, call it HR tech, or basically someone in the org buys the tool, and the user, the end user, is employees, and it doesn't necessarily align with what the buyer wants out of it. There have been a lot of companies building for the buyer, because it's actually the easiest thing to do, right? Like, you're selling to the buyer, you want to make them happy, so you build something that works for them. So that gets you through the door, you sell. But the issue is that in a lot of cases, and I'm sure you have companies in mind or products in mind that fit this, they don't get used. And so basically, yes, you sold your product, you have a 12-month contract, you're happy, but then no one uses your product because actually it wasn't built for them, right? They weren't the persona you were building for, so it makes sense. And then you just struggle to get them to use it. If it doesn't work, then you lose the contract at the end of the year. You got in, you had like you had revenue for 12 months, you feel good about yourself, but you lose the contract after 12 months, which is not great. And this is not what we aim to do. So we actually took a completely opposite approach, which is, let's build a product for the end user, make sure we deliver value to the end user. So when we sell it to the buyer, these guys are gonna already gonna be happy to use it because we built it for them.
Yeah.
And so that dictated our go-to-market at the beginning, because what we wanted is just to get it out there, have as many people use it and give us feedback on it, so we can improve it and get it to a point where we are now, where about 40% of our monthly active users use the product on a weekly basis, which is great. On average for SaaS products, when you're above 20%, you're in a good position. We're at double that. So we're really, like, I think we managed to do what we aim to do. But then you face that struggle, which is, okay, the buyer actually expects something different. So how sell this to a big a CHRO, like a chief HR officer or chief people officer, a COO? These are our main personas, or a founder. So how do you sell them this? It is the value prop of, like, delivering value to the manager enough? We're kind of discovering maybe not, or maybe it's like a messaging positioning. So we're working on making that positioning right for the buyer, and potentially also tweaking the product slightly so it fits their needs.
No amount of change management can get adoption if you don't design for the user. So
Yeah.
yeah, good move to focus on the user. And so what was the genesis? How did you come up with this idea of pursuing Waggle?
Yeah, well, before this, I was a COO at a fintech that I joined very, very early, when we were about 4 people, pre-product, pre-revenue, and helped scale to about 80 people, of which I managed about 50, raised the 50 million Series A, got to 200,000 users, customers. And when I first joined, or when I was hired into this role, I was hired because I had a background in finance and compliance and risk management. But that very quickly was just maybe 10% of the work I was doing, and most of my time was spent building high performing teams and, like, a high performance culture. And that's where managers are so central, especially as you scale, because they are that in between layer between the teams and the leadership team as you start hiring more people and creating a structure within the company. And so, because they sit in between, if there's a failure at that level, then whatever you decide at the senior leadership doesn't really get done or doesn't work across the company. So it was super central to make sure that managers were good managers, that they know how to lead, they know how to give feedback, they know how to set a strategy or a plan for the team. And all like I was looking for solutions to help me do that, and I couldn't really find any. Like the products, like most of the solutions that were out there were these like traditional training programs where basically you bring someone in house, they do the training, and I just couldn't shake off the feeling that that didn't work, because I know that even if I sat through that program, I would 90% forget it and never actually do that. And people learn way more through feedback because it's more customized to their situation. It's linked to what they're going through, so it's easier to remember and it's easier to put into practice. And the idea was really, we have an Apple Watch and we know like that the Apple Watch gets you to exercise more, right?
Yep.
You can tell someone that exercise is good for them, that they need. Yeah, you spend 2 days saying, hey, you should exercise. Then you don't tell them again ever. They're not going to exercise. We know that. We know that what works is like repetition, and the fact that you have something that shows you progress, that measures your progress, that gives you data back, and creates self-awareness around what you're good at and what you're not so good at. We know that that's what works to create better habits, but it wasn't really applied to the business world. So I was like, why does this not exist? Why are we not doing management training that way? And so that's how I came up with the idea and started speaking to other managers and realized I wasn't the only one having a problem with that. So there was probably something to do there. And obviously, then you do lots of interviews until you're clear on what you need to build to solve that problem.
And so from the company that you came to this, scaling the company from what, 4 to 80, as you scale rapidly, what were some of the scaling challenges and lessons in that journey?
The main one is that your job really changes in the first few years. Your job every 6 months is not the same job as 6 months before. What was important 6 months ago is not necessarily what's important right now, but also the structure of the team is different. So there's the way I think about it, especially being a COO, but I think this applies well to a founder as well, is that you need to fire yourself from your job very often. You need to look at what you do, what you spend your time doing, and think about whether that's the best use of your time or whether there's someone in your team that can take over that and either do it better or do it to free up your time. If it wasn't that important, do it to free up your time so you can focus on what you should be doing. So if your job hasn't really changed or your day-to-day activities haven't changed in, I don't know, the last 12 months, there's something off. Like there's probably something that you need to sit and think about, and fix.
When you keep adding people, things slow down, right? Because ramp up takes time, people take time getting assimilated to the culture. How did you keep pace with growth?
Yeah, well, that's where managers are super important, right? Because they're the ones who set the pace. And if they're not able to delegate well or to set like the strategy at the team level or the company level, things are going to start to break down, and you're going to start getting that feeling where, oh, we were 5 or 10 people last year, now there's 20 of us and we're not doing more than what we used. Five, then now when you're 20, there's probably something broken in the in that management layer. Why? Because that probably means that your managers are not working on the most important beyond the onboarding journey. I mean, obviously there's a lot that you can do to speed that up, put more things into writing, build a repeatable onboarding plan, etc. But that seems kind of obvious. I think where it becomes really sticky is around how the strategy and the focus of the company trickles down the rest of the team. So if, let's say, you say our goal is to increase retention this quarter or this next 6 months, we need to absolutely, like, a priority number one is to increase retention on the product. But that if that wasn't communicated well enough, then you might find that 80% or 70% of the teams are actually working on something completely different. They're making progress on that other thing. It's just that that other thing is not as important as retention. So when you're looking at your retention metric, it's not moving. This is why you get this impression that, oh, like last year we were 5. I would just sit in one room and tell everyone your number one focus is retention, and they would all work on retention. Now there's 20, so the communication and like silos that start forming make that message hard to reach. And so you need managers to really be that link between what the strategy is and what the execution needs to be. And that's why management and like managers are so important, especially in that scale up phase.
Yeah. So alignment basically goes haywire, and you start slowing down if that's not the case.
Yeah. Because people are not sitting there doing
Yeah.
nothing. They
Yeah.
are doing something. And that makes it even harder to spot what the problem is because you see them like doing stuff. So you're not like, okay, I'm going to fire this person because they're not producing or they're not doing anything. They are doing something, but what they're doing is not impacting what you
Yeah.
want to impact.
Yeah, makes sense. We also spoke about, because the flatness goes away pretty rapidly when you go from, being in on one table to adding layers. Um, Org design becomes very important. How you structure your teams, because when you're a team of 5, you can't really go too wrong with the structure of the team
Yeah.
because there is no structure. So what were some of the lessons around org design, going from a flat structure to quickly an 80% team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's no right or wrong answer, and what works for a company like might not work for
Hmm.
another. I think the way I like to approach these topics is to think about it like a product or like a product manager. So, how would you build a product? If the product is the org
Hmm.
design, how would you do it? You'll probably speak to users. In this case, your users are your employees and your team
Hmm.
members. Understand their problem, and like how they feel the pain points, and then probably like build an MVP version of that org
Hmm.
design, test it, see what works, get feedback again from the users, and iterate on it until you reach a point where it works. And it might break again 6 months after or 12 months after because the problems you had back then are not the same ones as you have now. So basically, you are personalized. Um, yeah, but that's the way I would do it. Is like speak to people, make sure you do it in an iterative way. So like a big bang change rarely
Hmm.
works. At the same way, it rarely works in a product. It's going to rarely work in an org because change management is a thing, right? Like making people change behavior takes
Yeah.
time. So doing it incrementally and iteratively is probably the best way to go.
One of the challenges that happens when you go from a flat to a hierarchical structure is you have to have a mix of probably internal promotions and bringing some leaders from outside.
Yeah, for sure. A few things that are super important to do there is being super clear with the people internally who are not getting promoted to these roles, why they're not, and why there's someone else who's coming in from outside.
Mm-hmm.
So the issues start to arise when there's someone internal who feels like, oh, they should have gotten that job and they didn't. And so they're not super involved in making it easy for this new person coming from outside to do their job, to integrate within the company. So that's one thing, like being super clear on what are the expectations for that, is where is the gap if there is one, if someone internal wants and like being transparent on the process as well, so that everyone is working towards the same goal, which is to make this hire a success. And like being super clear. What's interesting as well, like a very good learning, is that when you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know, basically you're not super clear on what the role you're hiring for externally is going to do or be, it's hard to get the hire right, because you don't know what you're looking for. So you're going to bring someone who fits the idea you have of what you want, and then you're going to face reality only once they start to say, oh, actually this is not what I wanted. What I wanted was more
Yeah.
this. And I think you get a better sense of what you want after you do the job yourself for some
Mm-hmm.
time, or you have someone
Internally.
internal do the job, even if they're not, yeah, even if they're not the best fit. But you, by doing it, you get a better sense of, okay, these are the qualities that I actually need. This is the experience that I actually need. This was the gaps in my own experience of, or in my own way of doing it, that I need to find someone that fills that those gaps, versus just going it completely blind and saying, oh, I need a head of marketing, when you actually don't know what the head of marketing is going to be doing day in day out,
Yep.
right? If you do the job for a while, you have a better view of what they need to look like or sound like or have done in the past.
Yeah, makes sense. On hiring, we also spoke about, you had an interesting take on not hiring via referrals. Why not hire from referrals?
Yeah, I know it's a bit of, I don't think I'm necessarily against hiring through referrals for every stage. I think in the early days, your best shot is probably to go through people who are referred to you, that people have tested before you. They know they're good, because you don't have as much bandwidth to go through applicants or
Mm-hmm.
candidates. And you probably also don't know how to run a good process either. You will only learn. So your best shot in the early days is still to go through referrals, I would say. But once you start having a more structured process, and once you start having the bandwidth to do like a structured hiring process, I think referrals sometimes harm your ability to assess objectively the candidate's skills.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is, when you get a warm intro, it makes you trust that person more by default, right? Like that's how humans we are. Like you are going to, like a friend of a friend, you're going to be more warm to them than a complete stranger. It's That's how we evolved over time, to not trust
Mm-hmm.
strangers. But with that comes also a lowering your expectations, I think. Or like you kind of are, you test someone who comes through a referral less than someone, and then it becomes hard to actually compare them to someone who doesn't, because you probably didn't test them as thoroughly. You probably still feel warmer to them and more inclined to hire them, but actually you might just missed out on that other candidate referred to
Mm-hmm.
you, but who's the better fit, who has stronger skills, but yeah, you missed out on them and went with someone who's more familiar, and they might not be the best person for you to hire. So I usually now try and stay away from referrals when the process is a bit more structured and the company is a bit more mature. Also, what this enables you to do is to have a diversity of thoughts and diversity of backgrounds within the company. If you only hire through referrals, you're most likely are going to hire people who think the same, who come from the same backgrounds, who have been to the same schools, because they know each other. Like that's how they got referred, and that's how you start having like a single way of thinking throughout the company, and that's not something you want. Because again, you miss out. I mean, there's a lot of research on this, but you miss out on lots of innovative ideas when everyone thinks the same.
Yeah, I think diversity is a good point. You definitely can improve diversity because of this. But what if you fix the root problem, which is the interviewing process of, keeping the interviews unbiased and and structured, and even having guardrails around biases, right? So that you can get the advantages of referrals but not get the disadvantages of the bias.
Being more aware that this is a bias you
Yeah.
have, saying it out loud that, hey, like this person was referred, they might be very good, but let's treat them exactly as we would treat someone else is the first step. Whether you can completely eliminate the bias, I'm not 100% sure.
Hmm. Once we have bots doing that for us, maybe. But yeah, subconscious biases certainly. So moving on, you are also an investor besides being a founder now. How was the transition from being an entrepreneur to actually being an investor?
It's an interesting one. So I'm a very small angel investor. So it's not like that's all I do. I'm like primarily a founder. But I think it's gave me a very good view of what the life or the an angel investor or VC has, and a better understanding of them and the way they make assessment and judgments. I would receive a lot of inbound email with pitch decks or people asking for investment. And that's probably like 10% of what a VC would get or a more established angel would
Yeah.
get. So I imagine the overwhelm of like pitch decks you receive. And it also makes me think about, okay, which ones do I actually reply to? Because I obviously cannot reply to
Mm.
everyone. And so then you take it less personally when you email someone and they don't reply. It doesn't just make your whole world collapse. Whereas like at the beginning, you're like, oh, like I emailed all of these people and no one picked up my email, like no one replied because yeah, they have other stuff to deal with, right? You're not there. And the second thing is I try and think, oh, why did I reply to this one and not this one? And in 99% of cases, it's because I feel they put in the work to speak to me specifically and not every. So when I receive an email where like an email or a LinkedIn inbound that says, "Hey, you have done this thing and that thing, and that's why I want to be speak. That's why I want to speak to you, and that's why I think you would be interested in what we're building." I'm more likely to respond, even if to say sorry, but like this is not my space. But if I get something like sometimes pitch decks for stuff that I have no experience in, like I have no knowledge about, no experience in, and in that case, I'm like, why are you like I'm not like you're probably reaching out to 1,000 of people today, so good for you, but I think the likelihood of someone picking that up is very low versus a more targeted approach. So I try and do that when I reach out to people. I try and make it like more custom to them so that they are more likely to answer back.
Interesting take. So you like salespeople as well?
That's such a hard one, right? I don't know. I feel like the blanket emails, I really wonder who responds to
Yeah.
them. I think they need to be extremely good for you to respond. But that's a great training, right? Like when as a founder, you need to do
Yeah.
sales. I say it a lot. I say that like the way the my best sales training, because I don't have a sales background, is those emails. Like I can see all of the things that they do that don't work and I don't think work with anyone, and say, okay, how can I not be that email? How can my email not be received the same way I received that email?
The amount of inbound messaging, regardless of whether you're an investor or a founder, that comes these days on LinkedIn, or I'm not able to like contact first degree connections because their LinkedIn is bombarded with inbound messages. They're like, oh, sorry, we missed it. Send us an email. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how this world is going to change over the next few months, because I think with AI, everyone has used it there
Yeah.
first. It's like potentially the first application that was successful for AI. But I wonder how it scales, because if everyone is doing it, then you're forced not to do it. And so I wonder if we're going to go through a phase where everyone is going to stop using AI on sales emails, because why would you? Because it's not working.
Yeah, so the I've seen a few tools that talk about like a personalized field to an outbound message, right? Generated automatically using AI. So they feed in a data set and all the public information there is on the target, and out comes a personalized email which has the why we should talk. It's hard to say if it's completely bad, but I could see if everybody starts doing it, then almost everybody has has figured out how to put the messaging on why to speak, and you only have 24 hours in a day. So I, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
the market is going to self correct itself. Then it's going to come down to network. I think, people who already have familiarity or who already have the network, it'll it'll probably all come down back to physically hustling and building a network and having that pull of people having some familiarity. That's what I feel. What do you look for in startups that you are investing right now as an angel?
I think a very clear why now is super key, because if this is an obvious market or an obvious thing that needs to be built, if the why now is not clear, then the question becomes, why haven't this been built before successfully? If it's super obvious, then why did no one do this before? And if you have a good why now, then it's clear it wasn't done
All right, moving on from investments. We've already spoke a little bit about this, but as an operations person, how do you see the impact of AI on org structures and the way we work in the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, we're going to be able to do more with less, obviously.
That's a
That's
given, yeah.
the most of. So I think the way I think about it is that as we go, humans are going to get better at what humans are good at, and AI is going to get better at what AI is good at. And that means that you'll have like almost hybrid teams between people managing. You're going to have individual contributors who are actually not pure individual contributor, but who are managing AI
Mhm.
agents. Now you'll probably have a team of 5 people using a bunch of AI agents each. But I think we're not ready
Yeah.
yet to be managed by robots or by AI, because they're like a lot of the skills that you need to have as a manager have to do with like interactions between people. How do you communicate? How do you motivate people? How do you give the right feedback? How do you coach people? And this is not something that AI is very good at. Let's see how things evolve. But the way I think about it is really that humans need to and are going to get better at human skills, and AIs are going to get better at AI. And you can start seeing this already. Research data points and like surveys from HR from recruiters on the skills they are looking for the most when they're hiring now. A year or 2 years ago, technical skills came first. And now, even for technical roles, they are looking for soft skills, but I think soft skills need a rebranding. So they need someone who's capable of critical, of working well with, good at communication, good aligning people. And these are not things that AIs are good at. And I think the fact that we've switched focus from pure technical skills, where AI is good, to these skills where AI is not going to help us for now, or is clearly linked to the fact that people are using more AI, and then these like pure technical skills, so basically just pure coding, is less important today versus what it used to be. What you also expect from a good developer or a good CTO is the ability to think through what like the product should look like, what the architecture should look like, not just do the pure coding. That aspect of the work is what's becoming more important.
We are obviously not ready to be managed by a bot for sure. And in that sense, I don't know if we have an inherent handicap because our monkey brains are not going to evolve anytime soon, which, yeah, makes you think at some point humans will become a liability in the chain because they are moving too slow. As one of the Google founders called Musk being a speciesist. Maybe we have a higher species or an AI running everything.
Let's see. Things are moving fast, but I think they're also not moving as fast as we think they are, because we are in a bit of a bubble. Like, we are looking at this very closely. We use AI on a daily basis, but if you go out there and ask people in the streets whether they use AI
Yeah,
tools, I can assure you that 90% of them don't, or they tried it once and
yeah.
stopped. Also, the pace at which this gets distributed across is not as fast as we think it is. And that's also due to the like limitations of AI products right now, right? ChatGPT, even with like the latest model, actually, I was super excited with it for the last few days, and very quickly I'm like, no, this is not good enough,
Right.
right? So that's the thing, is like you quickly get to the limitations of the tool, and you go back to like human skills, which are not like, there's so many things that we can do that AIs are not good at and are not going to be good at for a while. I think we should just double down on those if we want to stay relevant, because that's where the value is. Like, critical thinking, completely new ideas, because of how Gen AI models that are statistical models work, they're never going to be good at. We will need to rethink the way they work for them to create completely new ideas. They're not built or designed to do that, but we can.
Yeah, LLMs have actually uh, made me question who we are as a species. Because at some level I feel like we are a very sophisticated LLM. We have a lot of stored information and our conscious is basically generating the next thing to say or do.
Fair. I think there's a portion of that, but I think by default our brain is probably working quite a lot like an LLM, because it goes back to default instead of intentional actions. But when we truly are intentional, I don't think this is something that LLMs can replicate in the way they've been built yet.
But I do agree. I think I do feel like it's a bubble. When you go out in the real world, outside does feel like there is a whole world out there that's running without AI. So yeah, makes sense. It's time for rapid fire. These are things we've not discussed. So they are surprise. Nothing out of the ordinary. You don't have to worry.
I'm not worried.
So if your startup had a theme song, what would it be and why?
That's a very good question. I think I know one. I don't remember the title, but I can send it to you after
Oh,
this.
nice. Being secretive. Sure.
Not secretive. I just like don't remember the title. But I'll send it across.
All right, fair enough. What's the most surprising lesson you've learned from a failure in the journey so far? Sounds like an interview question, but
One interesting one, I think, is how managing your energy as a
hmm,
founder, how impactful that is. And by that, I really mean energy, not
hmm,
time. So I used to be the sort of person who like would work like stupid amounts of hours, whether I feel like my brain is working or not. Like, those days when you feel like your brain
yeah,
is foggy and you're not completely
yeah,
focused. I used to still
power so.
like power through and try and do whatever I plan to do. But I'm learning to that like sometimes in those cases, because I'm more free in how I manage my time, it's way more efficient to stop and take the time off and then come back. Basically, if I have 4 hours to get something done and my brain is foggy, potentially taking one of those 4 hours and for
Hmm,
rest and coming back, I'm going to achieve way more in the 3 hours that I have than if I stay in front of the computer for 4 hours. And that's an interesting one because it's not the way I would naturally react. So this is something that I still need to remind myself often.
yeah. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, because there is always as a founder, there's a infinite, like the to-do list is never ending. There is just no end.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're better off managing energy than the tasks that are to be done. Yeah, yeah, interesting. So, last question. If you could instantly master one skill to help your startup, what would it be? And how would it change your business?
Sales is such an underrated skill. Um, when I went to business school, like no one wanted to do the sales program. Like, we all were looking down on the sales program. But if I had to go back to school or start my career from scratch, I would spend a few years doing sales, whatever that the product that needs to be sold or whatever service needs to be sold. I think this is such an important skill as a founder to have. No, because that's all you do. You need to sell your company to investors, to employees, to customers, and we don't value that enough earlier in life.
Selling is a hard skill as well. Being an engineer myself, you can basically be in front of a screen, nobody looking at you, and do your work. But sales, a lot of sales has to be done in public, facing someone either on a call or at an event. Yeah, sales is hard. Thanks for taking the time. It was a lovely chat, and yeah, I'm looking forward to pushing this out.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thanks. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. See you in the next episode.